Hello, welcome to the second lecture for week 8, which would normally be the 6th week of the semester. In this lecture, I'm going to offer a comprehensive breakdown of the first assessment task. So I'll go through the task itself, point to the key information. I'll also point to the rubric as well and the template, just to make sure that your understanding of the assessment and the expectations around the criteria is as developed as possible, so you can be confident as you progress through the task that you're going to be rewarded for your efforts and your understanding that you show. So let's start with the obvious here, that it's worth 55%, so a decent portion of the overall grade. The bulk of those marks are distributed to your individual component, and the group component is worth 15%. So the assessment task is due on the 27th of April 2025. What I would note is that an auto extension is not available for this assessment task. And the reason for that is because this has a group component. So we would end up with sort of an unworkable system, and assessments wouldn't be returned appropriately. So the auto extension is of course available for the second assessment task if you'd like to take it. It should be returned around the 19th, so we hopefully will be able to get that back with feedback before the submission of the final assessment task. The length overall is a maximum of 12 pages in total. That's including the individual component and the group component. However, that excludes references and appendices. So for the syllabus links, for example, you can move content points and full explanations or full descriptions of the outcomes into the appendices to save yourself some space. It is a group assessment task, at least in part. It is to be submitted on the Brightspace website. What I would say is that everyone is responsible for submitting both parts. So everyone should provide the unit outline. It should be uniform, and we will double check that. And then you would submit your own assessment tasks only. We just want to make sure that no one is disadvantaged in case someone fails to submit the group assessment or something along those lines. So you submit everything, long and short of it. So let's go through the general overview of assessment 1. So this assessment task is designed to simulate teachers working in stage teams. So that's where the group component of this comes into it, and it's putting you in a professional project-based learning environment. So in groups of 4, ideally, 4 of your classmates, 3 other pre-service teachers will work to create a unit outline that it comprises 3 lessons per student. So, a group of 4 would have 12 lessons, a group of 3 would have 9, group of 2 would have 6, and so on and so forth. We don't want the groups to go into the number 5 or 6 because the units become too large. So this is an environment that is typically experienced by teachers, and it sort of gets you in the space of working through the curriculum, making the decisions that we would hope you would take as qualified teachers in a few years as well. So you will be meeting in stage teams to plan the curriculum. You would do this in a school, and that's what this subject has been to this point, or will be if you're watching this ahead of time. The tutorials reflect the stage meetings for the first half of the semester, at least till the submission of this assessment task. So you are required to work collaboratively with your peers as pre-service teachers to develop a unit overview. So essentially an outline of the lessons in sequence to give us a top-down perspective, a broad perspective of how learning will develop across the 9, 12, 6 lessons, 3 per person in the group, basically, for a key knowledge and understanding strand within the New South Wales K-6 syllabus, which is linked there. So there will be a core knowledge understanding a strand that you will address, but you will bring in other strands to support that, and we'll go through that in the rubric as well. Once your unit group has designed a sequence of lessons, and that document is approximately 2 pages, excluding appendices and references, you then further develop the 3 lessons that you've outlined in the unit outline into full lesson plans. So they're related components, in essence. So as an individual, you create 3 lesson plans fully, and you outline briefly 3 lesson plans in the group's unit outline. Okay? So of the primary strands you'll focus on, you will have a choice between earth and space, living world, material world, physical world, digital technologies. We will probably focus you on the science components because digital technology emerges in the second half of the semester. How this is decided might vary from campus to campus. If we have an expert on one campus in an area, we might move towards that. We could go stage level focuses with so everyone doing stage 2. We could have a tutorial group focusing on one strand but moving through the stages. What we'd like to avoid though is everyone doing the same stage and same main topic area. While you will all be addressing the key area in each lesson, be it living world, material world, physical world, or earth and space, you will be able to make links to others. It's just this will be kind of the main structural focus, the main knowledge and understanding strand. And hopefully by this point in the semester, you will have been through the syllabus and be more than familiar with that. So you'll develop that unit of work which will incorporate student-centered models, and the lectures cover this. They're covered in detail throughout. The 5E's framework and the syllabus are the key things in all of this. And you will use a range of instructional strategies which were covered in the week 5 lecture. The 5E's framework is covered in the week 3 lecture. Inquiry learning and problem-based learning are mentioned consistently throughout, although primarily in week 5. And you also need to apply your knowledge in the assessment task, your knowledge of assessment, which was the lecture just before this one, part 1 of week 6, brackets 8. Okay, so there's a lot being covered here. But this is a reasonable approximation of what would be expected of you as a teacher in a school. We are asking for more detail, but we are trying to assess your capabilities, so we need that require more detail. So the final submission will include a unit outline that will span 6 to 12 lessons, 3 per student, so it will vary. And there's nothing specifying a number of lessons in the rubric for that reason, because we don't know how many will be in each group, and that would generally reflect one school term. You will then take 3 lessons yourself and individually design full lesson plans for these. We have templates, we have examples, we have all those sorts of things. So the group work part is worth 15%, which we think is quite reasonable. Gives you a nice outline, gives you enough reason to work together, but doesn't link you together permanently, and move it away from being your individual attainment of goals as well. So you'll create that outline. As I mentioned before, it will have one key knowledge and understanding feature here. You will submit the outline of the unit of work with the template provided. So the template I will show you, there is no direct penalty for not using the template. Okay, so we don't look at it and say, oh, well, no, the template's not used, immediate fail. That's not true. But the template is designed with this assessment task in mind. So what has happened in the past is when people don't use the template, it's usually a good sign they're not paying attention. And that is what leads to people including information that is not necessary and missing information that is necessary. So don't just pick something up that you've seen on your pracs. Heavily recommended that you use the template. Although if you don't, we'll mark it for what it's worth anyway. But good luck, because we don't normally see good work produced without the template. If you want to change the templates, you can, but talk to your tutor about it, would be my advice. The unit outline will include the following elements. A title for the unit of work could be an inquiry question, could be a play on words, it's up to you. You will need to pick a stage level for the unit of work, not multiple. Just pick one, otherwise it becomes too complicated. If you want to include other stages in your unit, the best you can do is maybe do a recap of a prior stage early on as a form of, I guess, diagnostic assessment. But you'll choose between early stage 1, which would be kindergarten, stage 1, which is years 1 and 2, stage 2, years 3 and 4, and stage 3, which is years 5 and 6. And hopefully we can negotiate that. But again, we don't want everyone doing the same unit, because then we can't share resources and do those sorts of things. Your unit outline must include at the minimum, so this is half a page's worth of information here, one knowledge and understanding outcome and related content. You can append the content, but again, the minimum is at least one of earth and space, living world, material world, and physical world. And you will need to include the working scientifically in design and production outcomes to support that. As we've discussed, this is kind of the content you're teaching, and this signals to how you're teaching it. It's a bit messier than that, but I think that's a good shorthand for this. You'll also need to include relevant outcomes from at least 2 other KLAs, one of which must be English. And you can't simply note it is English. You will need to provide outcomes and syllabus information from the other syllabus documents. I think there's plenty of opportunities across 9 or 12 lessons to do that. And remember, this is marked as a group. So if someone does English and someone does creative arts, the group has gotten to the at least 2 threshold, okay? You'll need to provide an outline of a series of 9 to 6 or 12 lessons. Again, depends on the size of the group, that are succinctly described, okay? So we're not expecting full detail here. The full detail comes in the form of the lesson plans, and it needs to be mapped to an appropriate student-centered model. The model that we have been describing is the 5 E's framework. If you wish to go a different route, you should consult your subject coordinator and make sure that they agree with what your approach. There are different approaches, but consult first. You should briefly describe the purpose and structure of each experience. So a good core feature, let's say you start with 4 sentences to get that succinct description. What the purpose of the lesson is, could be an inquiry question, what the students will do, what the teacher will do in support, and maybe something around assessment and connection to the next lesson or future lessons. The better units outlines will have connections between, one lesson after the other and amongst, looking across the lessons and consolidating in a longer period, okay? You will be individually responsible for outlining your 3 lessons. So if someone in your group doesn't do the work, you leave it blank and we will mark accordingly. You will not be punished if other people do not do the work. We will act as if that person was never in the group in the first place. Okay, so we will adjust our expectations accordingly. We do this every year. And we also need a record of each group member's contribution to the unit outline. So there are, you can provide a summary for that if you wish, but at the bare minimum, there will be names next to each of the lessons in sequence. This lets us differentiate if necessary. If someone does an extremely poor job or an extremely good job, we can maybe adjust marks in the group component. Although normally people are pretty consistent in this space, so we don't need to be too negative. Again, refer to the template, which I will talk to you about soon. If you're listening ahead of schedule, groups will be created in week 1 of the session, maximum week 2. If you show up in week 3, game over. You'll be doing it by yourself. You can do it by yourself. There's no direct penalty for that, but it will make your time in class extremely difficult and disengaging. And my recommendation would be, if you want to do that, I would transition to the online version of the subject, EMS207. There is an expectation that students attend classes in order to work collaboratively in their group. That is the expectation. You don't have to go to extra classes or extra group meetings. You can if you'd like, but it is not required. So you cannot be forced to do that by your group members. Okay? So show up and you show up to class tutorials and you'll be doing your work on the assessment in the tutorials. That's the easiest way to do this. Highly recommend doing that. If you can't make a class, make sure you're in contact with your group and completing tasks in sequence, but try not to miss class. In week 5, you will get the opportunity to present your unit outline to peers to receive constructive feedback. Okay, that is ungraded. It is purely formative. You do not have to engage with this. It is purely open feedback about what could be improved, what the strengths are, but we're just signaling to that so that people can plan ahead accordingly if you're coming through this. The second part, of course, is a lesson plan. So you take your 3 outlined lessons, the short summaries, and you turn them into full lesson plans for your individual component for part B, okay? So you have to design and plan for 3 complete lesson plans. The more detailed, the more supporting material, the better ultimately. Each lesson will need to include at least 3 learning activities. This seems somewhat arbitrary. A lesson, we're normally thinking 40 to 60 minutes, but we are reasonably generous in that space because you don't quite know what the timing is, and to be honest, things change quite a bit. But what this means is your lesson can't be a lecture or one discussion. So you might have a discussion, an investigation, and a discussion. Those would be 3 distinct activities. So the length of the activities isn't key. They have to be 3 distinct activities requiring students to do 3 distinct things and not the same thing the entire time. Okay? You may source your ideas from other spaces like Scoodle or Primary Connections. Recommended you adapt them and tweak the ideas, but make sure you cite them as well. Okay? You can borrow from other areas. In fact, we recommend that, but do cite and do adapt if you can. For each lesson, you'll need to describe what the students will be doing. Okay? Are they working in groups? Are they doing cooperative learning? Are they filling in worksheets? Whatever it may be. You'll also need to outline the teacher's role in the lessons. So, are they asking questions? Are they providing support? Are they offering prompts? Are they providing examples? And if so, tell us what. Yes, this is a lot of detail, but we want to see what's under the hood, what is going on in your brain, what your conceptualisation of quality science teaching is. You'll need to identify the components of the appropriate student-centred model, in our case the 5 E's. Remember, the 5 E's should not be skipped, merged or reordered. And please don't use them as verbs. Don't say, I will engage in an exploration that will explain, and don't do it. Actually, if you do it, you haven't paid attention anyway. So I'm assuming anyone that's watched this is probably not part of the cohort I'm talking about here. But again, if you want to use another model, talk to us first. We don't like surprises. You'll have to identify and incorporate instructional approaches. So you can identify them, but we'd expect to see the description of the lesson body supporting that. So if there's a jigsaw signals, what are the different elements that different groups or individuals will look at? So we look at the body of the template and then see if that aligns with the sort of supporting elements. You'll need to incorporate different forms of assessment. The greater the detail, the better for your mark. So if you provide supporting rubrics and examples, higher mark than just saying, yeah, I'm going to question. You'll need to consider both the purpose, diagnostic, formative and summative, and the data collection form with that. We've talked about that in the last lecture for week 6, so go and check that out, or week 8, I should say. You need to address relevant science and technology outcomes and address these within your activity. So that's a judgment call on our behalf. If you have the students working at too low a level, or the content is too basic and doesn't show a clear connection to the syllabus, you will be penalised for that. So as long as you're working closely with the syllabus, you should be fine. You'll need to align with at least 2 other KLAs, one of which must be English. You will need to identify and provide where appropriate. Now, if you're talking about physical materials for an activity, an experiment, that's fine. You don't need to send them to us. But anything that can be reasonably shared digitally should be provided. So if you're going to have the students complete a worksheet, we need to see the worksheet. You can create it yourself. You can source it from somewhere else. The more work you do, usually the more you're rewarded. Rubrics, teacher background statements, digital technologies, PowerPoint presentations, whatever you're doing, if it's needed to teach it, we should see it there. Myself or any other tutor in the subject should be able to pick up what you have provided and go and teach it exactly as you envision it. That's what the level of detail we're expecting to see. And you'll need to provide in-text references to meet APA guidelines. I would suspect the bare minimum would be the syllabus documentation. You can cite that. Academic and scholarly referencing will really come through in the second assessment for the two-page report. There should be no more than 3 pages per lesson plan. It is in the template, 10-point font, single-spaced. If you go over the 3 pages, the marker reserves the right to stop reading. That's what will happen. It's no penalty. There's no 5 marks taken away, but we can stop reading. That's only fair. Markers are paid for a limited amount of time, and I don't want them to spend hours and hours going through 10-page lesson plans. So they may add a comment saying, I stopped marking here. Some give half a page grace, some don't. Stick within the 3-page limit is my suggestion. You should refer to the template. I keep referring to this just in case anyone knows, but of course you'll be providing in the submission both the unit outline, the group component, so we'll see 3 or 4 copies of that, identical copies hopefully, and then 3 detailed lesson plans. So you only provide your own lesson plans. You do not need to provide everyone else's, just your own. Okay, so that's the task itself. Let's go down to the rubric. Oh, excuse me. There it is, and I'll turn off the little icons here. So the rubric has the marking criteria for the 15-mark unit outline and the full lesson plans down here. It's fairly lengthy, but it's important because we want you to understand what you can do to gain high marks in the subject and why that's happening. So the first 3 elements here are satisfactory, unsatisfactory components. We'd call them formative, meaning they don't have a direct penalty to marks. However, logically speaking, if you write quite poorly and it is incoherent, it is going to stunt your ability to describe lessons and things of that nature. Okay, but what I can assure you is if we give you an unsatisfactory grade in this, you're probably going to go and need some form of academic support for writing. So the first thing we are marking you on is your academic language conventions. We're not expecting the King's prose or anything like that. It needs to be coherent, structured, and legible. we want to make sense of it, we're going to try, but if we can't, it may get an unsatisfactory grade and we may direct you to academic support services. The group members need to be assigned lessons. So group members are assigned 3 lessons each. So if you get confused and you are an individual and you produce 12 lessons, 3 are getting marked and we'll choose which 3. So make sure every group member gets 3 each. If someone drops out and leaves theirs blank, leave them blank. Don't do other people's work. It is not worth your time. And of course, we need APA 7th referencing, probably for the syllabus at the bare minimum. But we don't want to get caught up in this. So if you're bad at it, we'll tell you to fix it. If you're good at it, that's fine. We're more interested in the quality of the writing. So this is here to prevent us from becoming kind of annoying copy editors, so we can focus on your work. The first weighted criterion for Part A is, of course, links to the syllabus. Okay, so we've got here both partial criteria for the cross-curricular links and the links to the science syllabus. So at the pass level, the science content is accurate, but the verbs may need development. So we can see that you've drawn on the nouns from the syllabus, but maybe they're idling at too low a level. There's too many listing activities, too many describing activities. It's not moving up into higher levels in accordance with the overall direction of the outcomes in the syllabus. Okay, but they are made to the relevant knowledge and understanding working scientifically and design and production components. So those are evident across the unit outline. So across your 12 description of 12 lessons, and we make judgment calls on that. Deep links, i.e. the science content and action/verbs are accurate. So basically at this point you've reached appropriate syllabus coverage. This would be what we'd expect from an experienced teacher, and again it covers the skills and knowledge and understanding strands appropriately. So at this point, a few little errors, fine, we'll pass you. You are developing, of course. At this point we say, okay, that's pretty accurate. If categorizing or listing or explaining is what's being asked, that's what's being delivered. At this level we see integrative links. So we can see that these skills aren't necessarily separate or implied, but it's actually very clear that they need to work scientifically in order to develop the knowledge and understanding outcomes. So they're perhaps conducting an investigation, they're designing a product, they're questioning, collecting data, analysing data, and those sorts of things. You can signal to these with brackets in your lesson descriptions, just short little, here's link, here's just the code or something like that. So there are different ways you can show us. You can colour code and do some of those sorts of things. At the highest level, so then it is fully necessary to work scientifically or through design and production to learn the knowledge and understanding outcomes. But at this level, they're sort of embedded within a grander theme or structure to the unit. So there's maybe a big idea or inquiry questions or a huge scenario that's tying the whole thing together. So it's almost moving beyond integration to sort of masking it, almost like a Montessori or a completely embedded learning style. Okay. And there is reference to the science to provide an explicit sequence between the lessons. So at these lower levels, it's implied. Like we might be able to look at it and say, oh yeah, look, I can see that, it's bottom up, it's starting simple and it's more complex. But at this level, at the high distinction level, we start to see the groups really explicitly tell us where those connections are. It could be summary quizzes connecting to the previous lesson. It could be they're taking data from prior lessons and using it for a purpose. It could be a form of ongoing assessment, but it is explicit how one lesson connects to the other rather than just implicit. Okay, so you might use brackets saying, work sample from lesson 2 will be brought in for this activity or something. Like you can show us that with very simple cues. In terms of the links to other KLAs, we have a basic link, i.e. it's just there. It's in the template. It's listed. Here's English and at least one other KLA. Tickety-boo. We love that. Great. You've got creative arts there or PDHB for group work, whatever it may be. That's across the 12 lessons. So that's extremely easy to achieve, I would argue. At this level, they're explicitly signposted. So we see maybe connections to specific lessons where they're occurring, maybe brackets after little activity descriptions saying here's the creative arts link or here's the English link or something like that. And we start to see that language from that syllabus like report writing or persuasive text or whatever it is. We can see that you've been in those other syllabus documents. And at this level, it's English and at least 2 other KLAs. So creative arts is suddenly joined by mathematics, maybe. Pretty straightforward. Again, at this level, the science and technology and other outcomes are crucial. So, for example, if you need them to produce a creative work as their assessment, we would argue it's necessary to engage with that to achieve the outcomes. So it's a bit of a judgment call. Or perhaps they're analysing data mathematically to answer a research question. So we know it's a deep integration. They need that other KLA to do it, and it's English and at least 3 other KLAs across the 9 to 12 lessons. Same level here, and we say at least 3 or more. So it gives us a bit of leeway. If it's really well done and really integrative, we can stick you at 3. But there's a clear indicator. The more across the unit, more opportunities, the better. And now you can probably see why it becomes a bit tougher if you're by yourself or in a group of 2. Not impossible, but a bit tougher. The next one is, of course, the descriptions of the lesson plan. So the short descriptions in the unit outline, the 2 pages. So at the pass level, the descriptions are provided. Great, so you've done the task. But some general language may be used. So, we might see kind of meaningless language like students will learn about, although that's probably a bit too general. Students will investigate, perhaps. So it's not specific signaling to specific pedagogies. Students will investigate, students will create, students will collect, but it's not giving us a lot of context, or you're not using the professional pattern language that has been outlined throughout the subject. At the credit level, clear descriptions of lessons are provided, so that sort of pattern language and precision is a bit clearer. Education jargon is used, and potential connections between the lessons are mentioned. So it's still a bit implicit, meaning you might say, we'll build on living things in lesson 1 by looking at environments. Build on is implicit. Yeah, we can see there's a connection, but you're not making it clear what that connection is. There's judgment on behalf of the marker to make that leap. Okay, so the more logical leaps we have to make on your behalf because you haven't made it clear for us, the lower the mark is likely to be. Detailed descriptions here, again, this is around language selection primarily. So instead of saying students will work in groups, students will work in jigsaw groups of 4 or something like that. So you use more specific language. So in this case, science education jargon is used. See all the lectures that have been done to this point. And then at this point, we have full relational descriptions, meaning the way they're described, usually in small phrases, acknowledges what's going to happen in future lessons and draws on what's happened in past lessons. So if you've had a previous excursion, they're doing things with the data collected on that excursion in follow-up lessons or something, but it's made very explicit what that is. And of course, it shows a clear progression of learning, and it's between and amongst. So it's not just lesson 1 connects to lesson 2, connects to lesson 3. Sometimes lesson 5 might connect to lesson 8. So if you've worked really well as a group, we might be seeing that between and amongst. And of course, science education jargon is used consistently. So you've worked as a group, those that submit are on the same page, you've participated in class. Students will talk about, have turn do, students will engage in think, pair, share. We can see that sort of full growth, and that's why it is a HD. We have some judgment here on the sequencing. These do overlap to some extent, but the sequence addresses the outcomes. Great. Identified. There may be minor issues with overlap, repetition, or disconnection. So you might have a few janky sort of repeated lessons and it might not quite flow, but it generally hits the outcome. So this is us acknowledging that you're still in a growth phase. At the credit level, there are no major issues or no issues with this sort of idea of repetition, overlap, or disconnection. You're not starting a second unit in the middle. You're not sort of arbitrarily going, now it's electricity and now it's suddenly become heat. Instead, you've maybe brought in something around housing or a community project or something that ties this together, or a scenario. So there is an overarching theme. Could be a question, a scenario, a challenge. See pretty much all the previous, I think week 3 was the first one. At the very least, we could see a bottom-up or top-down approach, and you can signal that in your lesson titles or questions or descriptions. At the credit level, lessons acknowledge prior and future learning. So, it's sort of said, maybe implied they're being set up for something later on, but it's not specific what they're doing, what skills they're using in those. We just have to make that judgment ourselves. We can look at it and see that it's happening, but we don't know what. So at the next level up, we can see they incorporate it. So maybe there's a worksheet they completed that's being brought forward. There's a quiz that they're developing. They see a quiz in week 3, then they develop a quiz in week 6 or something. There's something tangible. It's going beyond, you could do something to this is what you would do. And again, there are no overlap issues here as well. So this is more about how explicitly the lessons connect to one another. Implied, explicit. At this level, they're covered with depth. So we really start to see, particularly around working scientifically in design production, unique investigative skills being pulled out. So there's sort of maybe stuff on questioning or collecting data or communicating scientific knowledge or something. You can really start to see the depth of the content points coming out beyond just the outcome, descriptions themselves. Again, there's an overarching theme, and the really important one that differentiates this is that skills, knowledge, and products are developed and incorporated directly and meaningfully across the unit. So they're developing skills and applying those skills throughout the unit. Could be part of your big scenario or something along those lines that is connecting all of this together. Maybe they're, creating a pitch. Maybe they're creating an ongoing storybook. I don't know. Maybe it's city-based and you're looking at material world, physical world. Maybe you're creating a zoo, something along those lines. And we've discussed it at length at this point. In terms of the individual component, you can see this is worth 40% of the grade, so a bit more extensive here. We still have the same formative criteria, which again are not directly marked, but you could understand if you failed to do these, it's probably going to limit your ability in other areas. So we decided to essentially not double tax you, would be the way to look at this. So the first formative criteria is the application of an appropriate student-centered model, okay? The 5 E's. If I start to see, verbing, I will engage in an explanation that will elaborate, you're probably getting an unsatisfactory grade for it. And it would be very hard to bounce back from this. And so usually we see people at this level who start to struggle with this. They're giving us intro, body, conclusion, video worksheet, and you're in real trouble if you do that. Like, you will not get a good mark. It needs to obviously have referencing and language up to standard. We'll let you know if it's poor. We just need it to be legible. We're not going to sit there and rewrite it or anything like that. We just want to make sense of it. And if you have problems, we'll direct you to support if needed. It doesn't typically happen at this point, but we will use it that way. So the first criteria here is the connection to the syllabus. It's very similar to the first one, but it's, softened a bit because you're an individual at this stage. So you won't need to go with as many connections. It's more about the depth and quality of them. So you can see, same story here. Basics, so again, content's right, but the verbs are not quite right. Actions and verbs are right. At the distinction level, they need to fully engage with the skills to get the content through investigations or designing products or completing scenarios. The 5 E's aligns with this quite effectively at the very least anyway. Everyone will probably get a chance at that. And of course, there's a central focus. Now, your group may not have done this, but you may have done it, for example, and have like a big question that covers your 3 lessons or something along those lines, okay? At the next level, and that's basically it. There's no extra bonus for, including more links to this syllabus, to like other knowledge understanding streams, but they can deepen it. So again, this sort of largely stays the same in terms of the number of areas. At the bare minimum, you're going to want knowledge and understanding at least 1 working scientifically or design and production. You'll see here in terms of cross-curricular links, it's 2, at least 2, at least 2, and at least 3. Okay, so you're not required to get 4, but you can imagine maybe a different theme in each lesson of yours, like an English, maths, and a creative arts or PHP or something along those lines. Okay, at this level, at the pass level, these are probably appropriate, but they lack detail and specificity. So we might sort of think, oh, you found the outcome, but you've got no further than that. So yeah, there's writing there, but we don't see in the questions or the prompts or the writing of the lesson plan any language from that syllabus document, but it's pretty appropriate and it's meaningful to the science learning. It just lacks detail, so pass. At the next level up, with your at least 2, the links are deep and aid the science learning. So we're not getting any sort of shallow random stuff. They're writing scientific reports, and that is requires English. They're analysing data that requires maths. So these KLAs are in aid of the science learning. They're vital to it. And the links are accurate, but they're a bit implicit. Again, not the full language is not quite there. At this point, the links are accurate and explicit in the activity descriptions. So you might be taking certain language from an English syllabus and saying, look, we're going to look at synonyms and antonyms in our categorisation activity or something like that. Okay, so it's there. We might see language italicised in your questioning prompts or something along those lines. Same thing here, but those links to other KLAs start to emerge in the supporting materials. So maybe there's a part of your rubric that has an English connection in it. Maybe there's something in the ICT space. Maybe there's an example that you've provided that that you've made that has connections to those other areas. So at this level, you're starting to get into the supporting materials and the appendices that get you into high distinction territory. In terms of weighted criterion 2, this is around the activities and the descriptions within the lesson plans themselves. So lessons include a range of appropriate teaching and learning activities and allow students to develop and to apply their conceptual understandings as well as demonstrate skills. So students are showing science knowledge and developing those skills. At the past level, the strategy and activity choices are appropriate. So this is more or less making sure you're not trying to teach advanced physics to kindergarten, that you're pretty much in the right ballpark, even if it's a bit basic, a bit bland. We could see it working, but it's not fully student-centred at this stage. At this level, the choices are student-centred. Now, this does not mean that you cannot use some teacher-centred strategies, but they're moving towards student-centred stuff is essentially it. This starts to kick in if all your stuff is video worksheet, lecture, video worksheet, discussion. Now, the students aren't advancing. The students are always passive or close to always passive. And the big thing here is that the students are encouraged to think and to represent their science understandings. So they're providing you data, they're drawing things, they're writing things, they're doing reports, they're presenting stuff. Like if you have been following along at home, this will be very easy for you to achieve because this is covered extensively in the lectures. At this point, it's varied. Again, a bit of a judgment call, but you're not just doing think, pair, share, all over and over again. There are different things happening. You might be playing around with problem-based learning here and the conceptual change model there and so on and so forth. So you're showing us some of those different things. At the distinction level, the students are directly scaffolded to think and represent their science understandings. So at this level, it's like, they're going to do this, but at this point, you're saying, well, they're doing this with, here's a worksheet, here's some key question prompts, here's an example that I've created, here's the rubric, depending on the 5Es phase. So you're providing that supporting material to make this work. And the big thing is opportunities for students' choice are included. I think that's a pretty easy one to get. It could be the topic. It could be the variables they're choosing to manipulate. It could be the roles they undertake. It could be the challenge or issue. It could be a jigsaw task. There are many opportunities to give students choice in their learning, and they can be defined, they can be small, but they give that sense of non-linearity. And at the next level, it is authentic. So there's some sort of connection, or at least in notion, to science beyond the classroom. So maybe they're solving a community problem, they're pitching to local council. There's something going on that projects this beyond their classroom. Even if it's beyond they're designing a school playground, I would consider that authentic. That it's not just science in the classroom, something's going on that projects outside of it. Students are directly scaffolded. So again, we talked about that. And the big one here is act on their science understanding. So they're maybe engaging and connecting to community members, completing design briefs. They're communicating those science understandings with different stakeholders. So that aligns with authenticity. And at this point, fully developed opportunities. So if there are different worksheets implicit to the opportunities, you develop those out, you explain the frame of reference. If there are different websites, you've provided the website. So all the materials needed to engage with those opportunities are provided. And they're not just, students get to choose. And you have to provide parameters for that choice or we won't count it. In terms of the detail, all lessons include descriptions, but the language may be imprecise. So maybe it's some mention of a bit of group learning, and I'm sitting there thinking, what do you mean? Like, how are you organising those groups? We've been through this. 3 activities per lesson, which we've talked about, and at least 1 cooperative learning strategy is used. So think, pair, share. Get it in there. It's a great one. Good starting point. Will get you across the line. At this level, they include clear descriptions, and the language is accurate and education specific. So things like direct transmission, inquiry learning, project-based learning, some of those sorts of general educational terms. You might be saying things like heterogeneous groupings or whatever you'd like to say, but using that pattern language that we're immersing you in the subject. There's at least 3 learning opportunities. So again, you're not required to do too much more. Like 3 good learning activities is a good one. And at least 2 different cooperative learning strategies are used, not per lesson, but across the 3. So if cooperative learning and think, pair, share emerge, congratulations, you've got a credit, or at least a nudge there. At this level, it includes deep descriptions. So again, what does that mean? Placements, where are you, where are the students, what questions are you asking, what teaching cues, what content representations, all those sorts of things. So it becomes very clear who's saying what to whom. But you don't need to give like intended answers for students or anything like that. It doesn't need to be a full script, but we want that level of detail. We've given some examples there. At least 4 activities per lesson. It's not too hard in sort of a 40, 60 minute period. Here's a discussion. Here's a round table, a station rotation. We're going to have a reflection activity, and then we're going to do something else. They just have to be conceptually separate. They can be 5 minute, 10 minute, 15 minute activities. They don't have to be huge, but they have to be different. And of course, at least 3 cooperative learning strategies are used, which I think is pretty reasonable. Same thing here, deep yet succinct. So again, you're not waffling at this point, and we'll show examples of that. And each learning contains a mix of differentiated teaching strategies. So at this point, you might be using some of those question frameworks to have questions for students working towards, working at, and working beyond. So you're starting to have strategies that are linked to students of different needs. And they're the same strategies. Tiered questioning is a good example that I would think of in that space. The next one is different forms of assessment. Again, this refers not to each lesson, but all 3 lessons in total. So at least 2 different assessment strategies are outlined. So you can't just say diagnostic assessment. You have to say diagnostic assessment captured through a cage world chart or observation or work sample. So you have to give both the purpose and the strategy for collecting data. You need the links between the strategies and the activity descriptions are clear and reasonably appropriate. So we're not seeing class discussion and multiple choice tests mushed together, because that wouldn't make any sense to us. So we see that what is in the body reflects what is put in the assessment column. 2 or more different assessment strategies, which I think is pretty generous on our part. There are so many strategies you could use, particularly if you're going through a phase of the cycle of the 5 E's, that you could definitely do 2 or more. The links between the assessment strategies and activity descriptions are explicit and appropriate. So maybe you're aligning the cells, you're bringing in brackets to show where a certain question links to a certain outcome, those sorts of things. So it becomes more explicit. Diagnosis of learners' conceptions is present. So, if everyone should get a chance at the 5E cycle. We can see that diagnostic assessment happening, and then 3 or more different formative strategies. So it's getting quite detailed here. One of which is tracking skills development across the lessons. So the scientific investigative skills, perhaps in the explore phase. I'll leave it to you to determine how you would do that. And the big change here is supporting materials for assessment are provided. Is it a template? Is it a worksheet? Is it a task description? Is it an example that you've created? Is it an example PowerPoint or a website or whatever else? Is it a rubric? Is it a self-assessment? Is it a peer assessment? It can be sourced from elsewhere though. It can be sourced from elsewhere. Just cite it. Diagnosis 3 or more, so there's no actual change here. But the assessment tasks are directly linked to the outcomes within the lesson. So we can see that really explicit alignment and a comprehensive array of supporting materials are provided. So you've provided some here, but more. The difference would be these might, at this level, it might all be text-based. At this level, they become multimodal, would be a good indicator. It's not set in stone, but it would be a good indicator. And if you start creating your own, that's also another good indicator. The final thing that you are marked for are the resources. So these sit outside the 3-page limit for each lesson plan. These go in the appendices, and the appendices are unlimited. So at the pass level, most resources necessary to teach the lessons have been either identified or included. So most. So look, you may miss a couple of things. Your website doesn't work. You link to a video, it doesn't quite work for us. That's fine. But we're not getting the problem of worksheet to be done and it's not provided for us. we don't like this, we want to be able to teach with this. So most is our get out of jail free card. You might have an error or two, but most of the stuff that we need is there. And the resources have been taken from reliable sources, your Scoodles, primary connections, some really interesting sort of stuff. I mean, there's heaps of stuff out there, but you've cited it. We can see that it's relevant. It's Australian based. It's not providing scientific misinformation. Again, at this level, identified or included. So again, if it's a list of materials needed for an investigation, fine. You don't have to 3D print it and send it to us. The resources have been adapted from reliable sources. So what I mean by this is you might take something from primary connections and change it to suit what you want to do. Great. Just write adapted from in your references, in your in-text citation of references. The resources are multimodal, so websites, videos, worksheets, etc. This is not by sheer number, it's by type. So if we see a worksheet, great. We see you can do that 3 times. They're worksheets. Videos, apps, whatever you like, presentations, audio clips. I mean, it's pretty wild how much is out there. I'll leave that to you. Written resources have been created by you. So you've made a worksheet, you've made a rubric, notice how if you were to do this here, you're also ticking this box here, just saying there's a lot of 2 birds, 1 stone happening in this rubric. You could do a worksheet, you could do a template for something, an example, but it's written and it's provided by you, not taken from somewhere else. And the student may list science content, background knowledge. So if you've got a section background knowledge, science background knowledge, not just the 5 E's, but the science, and you've listed it, and I can maybe click on links and go and find some more information, that would be great. Highly recommend it. It's free marks on the table. At this level, all resources have been identified and included. Again, adapted is key. Varied, so not just multimodal, but varied. So, let's say 3 or more different types in total. Website, a presentation, worksheets, rubrics. Yeah, that's about 4. Sure, great. We'll probably nudge you up here. The student may outline the background information, though, and some different types have been created by the student. So at this level, it's just written that's been created by you, but you might have created something else to go with this. You might have taken pictures of something you did in a tutorial as an example of the setup. Oh, that'd be a good idea. Probably should do that. Free marks. And the science content is being outlined. So you haven't just listed it, you've started to explain the science content to us, in a sense. And, it's been taken from reliable sources. You see CSIROs, primary connections, those sorts of places. Again, same sort of thing here. Lots of variation in types of resources. Student provides robust science background information by unpacking different scholarly sources. The textbooks, Scamp and Preston, are really good. You've gone on Google Scholar. You might have found some really cool things and referenced those in an academic way. Then you're sort of headed to the high distinction, and at the high distinction, many different types of resources have been created by the student. I mean, I'm creating a video right now. Think about it. You create a worksheet, you go to a tutorial, you do an investigation, you maybe produce a video of you saying, oh, hey, here's the task. And then there's a picture. Well, that's 3 different things, and that would be considered many. So up to you. But the time and the resources are there to do it in tutorials, so you probably... If you've got a phone and a computer, you can definitely do it. We'll just say that. Those things are all weighted and, of course, marked that way. Quick look at the template before we finish up here. Let me just look at the time. It's 47 minutes is not too bad. So again, cover sheet, finally updated the logo. So put your name, student number, and the group members as well, just so we can group you together and keep track of this. Date submitted and subject coordinator, that's for you to fill in. You can see the template here. The yellow text is to be deleted. It is there to give you some advice and some guidance. For example, the recommended thing for this here is 1 page. If you find it hard to stay on 1 page, you might start to append the content, would be my recommendation. Okay, the links to other KLAs will need to be there. Note that you should use the codes and hyperlink to those outcomes on the internet would be fine, or as appendices if you want to get around the 2-page limit. Okay, the more detail the better. Some groups explain how they're being linked or show this is lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3. But at this stage, and in fact for past standards, it's generally quite sufficient to just copy and paste them, as long as you've addressed them. As long as you've done the work, copying and pasting is fine. You then get 2 pages for this. So the way it works is 2 pages for groups of 2 or 3. You can get extended to about half a third page if you've got a group of 4, because we've had issues with this in the past. You put the name in. You might change that to the key question or something like that. Or you might add assessment details. So you can manipulate this if you'd like to add stuff that you think helps you in the marking. You need to provide your description here, a few sentences. I think 4 is the baseline. Start with 4. What the purpose is, students are doing, teachers are doing. This is how we will be assessed, brackets, or this is what happens next. This is the connection to the next lesson. You can link your own the group members' names have to be included. If you don't like that, you can sort of shrink it, change it. But we need only 3 per person. Okay, don't do other people's work. If theirs is blank, leave it blank. And then you include the references specifically for part A. Okay, so separate reference lists to keep it nice and easy for everyone, so you're not waiting for everyone. And of course, you can have those appendices included there. In terms of I won't go through these. These 3 are identical for your 3 lessons, but I'll just briefly talk about how these can work and operate. So these can just be the outcome codes. You don't need to provide the full detail, just the codes, so that it's easy to keep in sequence. In this column, you want to write the descriptions of what's happening. So the students will, break into groups. They'll answer certain questions. This is where you put your question prompts. Descriptions of activities, how long things will take potentially, although I wouldn't get too stuck in how long things will take. Just a rough estimation might work. I would recommend probably having the 5 E's as headings. You don't need to explain the 5 E's to us. We want to see that in the description of the activities. Okay. At this level, these 2 columns, you don't need to explain the assessment. The application comes through here. So you might even shrink these down. And what I would recommend doing is actually inserting, so if you highlight this entire row here and click insert row below, you can start to create rows for each activity. Insert row below. So we could imagine a scenario where we might say, okay, this is my engage phase. This is what the students are doing. Students respond to a series of key questions. ... Here's question 1, and I put them in there and do those sorts of things. Over here, I say something like class discussion, and I'm also doing think, pair, share, but I have that reflected in the description. So I might say afterwards something like, after each question, students will be given 30 seconds to reflect, and so on and so forth. You also put the codes in here, so we might go, look, this is working scientifically, etc., etc. This is living world. I might ask them about the nature of science, and then I include my assessment strategies. I might have a K to world chart, but I might cite something and go, oh yeah, I found this from this Smith 2014, and include that. But the detail goes in here. These are just identifying elements. These are secondary rows. The bulk of the information description goes in here. We don't need a justification of why the 5 E's are tickety-boo. We know why the 5 E's are tickety-boo. This is you giving us teaching detail. You can list the resources here, but I would probably recommend including most of your resources in the appendices, which can go on forever. You can link them to Google Drives. You can do whatever you like. You can insert them directly. It doesn't really matter. Just make sure we can access them. Don't hyperlink to your own computer. There's my advice. Test it before you use it, because sometimes you get people sending hyperlinks to their own computer, and we don't have links to your computer. So if you are not inserting it directly into the document, you probably should be using a Google Drive with links that we can access. But anyway, if you have any questions, you can certainly contact me or your subject coordinator. But that's it for the assessment breakdown. And I'll be back next week to really kickstart off the second half of the semester and move into the digital technologies aspect.